Cleaner fired for helping elderly woman who fell on street, but days later discovers who she was. Matthew Thompson had been cleaning the same hospital corridor for 5 years without ever being late, but that Tuesday morning, everything changed when he stopped to help an elderly lady who had fallen on the sidewalk. The supervisor, Oliver Brooks, who had been looking for a reason to fire him for months, used those 15 minutes of lateness to humiliate him in front of all the morning shift staff. Seeing Matthew arriving sweaty and still holding the duster he had used to shoo away a dog from the fallen woman, Oliver didn't want to hear explanations. He shouted in the middle of the corridor that this would be the last time the cleaner disrespected the institution's rules. "You're fired," yelled Oliver, pointing his finger at Matthew's face. 5 years or 50, it doesn't matter. Here the rules are for everyone." Matthew felt his stomach churn. That job was all he had to support his mother at home. Mrs. Catherine had been sick for 2 years, dependent on expensive medications and monthly appointments that he could only afford with great sacrifice. "But Mr. Brooks, I can explain." "Explain nothing," cut off the supervisor. "Go get your things and get out of here now. I don't want to see your face ever again." The nurses and technicians passing through the corridor looked at him with pity, but no one dared to oppose Oliver. He was known for his harshness and the power he held over the cleaning staff. Matthew swallowed the sob that insisted on rising in his throat and walked to the locker room. While retrieving his belongings from the locker, he thought about his mother waiting at home. How would he tell her that he had lost his job? Mrs. Catherine already suffered so much from her illness. She didn't deserve this additional worry. He put away the clean uniform he always kept there for emergencies and closed the locker for the last time. On the way back home, Matthew had to walk because he didn't have money for the bus fare. The delayed salary would only come at the end of the month, and he had spent his last dollars on his mother's medications the previous week. With every step, he felt the weight of defeat crushing his shoulders. Mrs. Catherine was sitting in the living room chair when he arrived. Her white hair was tied in a bun, and she was knitting a scarf that was already over 3 feet long. Seeing her son coming home so early, she immediately dropped her needles. "Did something happen at work, my son?" Matthew couldn't hold back the tears. He knelt beside the chair and rested his head on his mother's lap, as he did when he was a child. Mrs. Catherine stroked his hair without asking questions, waiting for him to speak. "I lost my job, Mom. They fired me because of 15 minutes of lateness." "But you're never late, Matthew." "I know. But today I stopped to help a lady who had fallen on the street. There was an aggressive dog near her. I had to use the duster to scare it away. When I got to the hospital, the supervisor fired me in front of everyone." Mrs. Catherine sighed deeply. She knew what that dismissal meant for both of them. The medications, the appointments, the rent that was already overdue. But she looked at her son with tenderness and said something he would never forget. "You did the right thing, my love. We might struggle, but we can never stop being good people. That lady you helped has a family that must be grateful." "But what about your medications, Mom? And the rent?" "We'll manage. We always have, haven't we?" That night, Matthew could barely sleep. He kept calculating how long he could cover the household expenses with the little he had saved. At most 1 month, he concluded. After that, he would urgently need to find another job, and he knew how difficult it was to find work at 34 without many qualifications. The next morning, he decided to look for a job. He put on his best pants and the shirt he saved for special occasions. He printed some resumes at the corner internet cafe, spending the few dollars he had left. He spent the whole day walking around the city, leaving resumes at hospitals, clinics, cleaning companies. Everywhere, the response was the same. "We'll review it and get in touch." The second day was the same as the first, and the third one too. On the fourth day, Matthew realized he didn't have a penny in his pocket. His mother's medicine was running out, and the appointment scheduled for the following week would have to be cancelled. That's when he had an idea he never thought he'd consider. On Thursday morning, Matthew woke up before sunrise. He took an old cooler he had in the backyard, filled it with bottles of water he bought on credit at Joe's corner store, and went to the busiest traffic light in the Upper East Side. He never thought he'd one day sell things on the street, but necessity left no room for pride. The sun was already high when an elegant woman stopped her car next to him. She wore large sunglasses and a blue dress that looked expensive. Matthew approached with the cooler, ready to offer the cold water. "Good morning, ma'am. Ice-cold water, just $2. The woman took off her sunglasses and studied him for a moment. There was something in her gaze that made Matthew uncomfortable, as if she knew him from somewhere. "Aren't you the young man who worked at Mercy General Hospital?" Matthew's heart raced. Did that woman know him? He swallowed hard before answering. "Yes, ma'am, but I was fired last week." The woman got out of the car so fast that Matthew almost dropped the cooler. She grabbed his arm with surprising strength for someone so elegant. "I've been looking for you for days. I didn't know your name. I didn't know where you lived. I went to the hospital 3 times, but they told me you didn't work there anymore. Ma'am, you must have me confused with someone." "No, I don't. You're the young man who helped my mother last Tuesday. She fell near the hospital. There was an aggressive dog, and you used a duster to protect her." Matthew felt the world spin. So that lady he helped was this elegant woman's mother? "I just did what anyone would do, ma'am. Believe me, not anyone would." The woman opened her purse and took out a card. "My name is Bridget Walters. I'm a lawyer. And my mother, Mrs. Helen, has been at Mercy General Hospital since that day. She fractured her hip in the fall." "I'm sorry to hear that, Miss Bridget. I hope she gets better." "She's physically fine, but she refuses any treatment." Bridget took Matthew's hands. She won't stop talking about the kind young man who saved her. She won't agree to have the surgery until she meets him in person to thank him. Matthew didn't know what to say. The idea of going back to that hospital, to the place of his humiliation, was too painful. "I appreciate the thought, but I'm not sure I can go back there. That's where I lost my job for helping your mother." "I know. My mother told me you were late. That's why I went looking for you at the hospital. When I found out you were fired for helping her..." Bridget stopped, emotional. "Please come with me. My mother needs to meet you. I'll pay for your time, for the inconvenience, for everything." "You don't need to pay anything, ma'am. If your mother wants to see me, I'll go." Bridget insisted on paying for the waters Matthew had in the cooler, and even gave him enough money to buy his mother's medicine. Matthew tried to refuse, but she was firm. "This isn't charity. It's the least I can do for someone who saved my mother." On the way to the hospital, Bridget told him more about Mrs. Helen. She had been a widow for 10 years, living alone in a large house in the city's Upper East Side. She rarely went out, spending her days reading and tending to the garden. But on that Tuesday, she had decided to visit her husband's grave, as it marked the anniversary of his passing. "My mother is very private. After Dad passed away, she shut herself off from the world. She doesn't receive visitors, doesn't answer calls from old friends. I'm practically the only person she talks to." Bridget wiped away a tear that escaped. "That's why I was so surprised when she wouldn't stop talking about you. I haven't seen her this excited about anything in 10 years. When they arrived at the hospital, Matthew felt a tightness in his chest. The memories of the humiliation were still very fresh. Bridget noticed his discomfort and touched his shoulder. "I know it's hard, but please do this for my mother." They went up to the 6th floor where the private rooms were located. Mrs. Helen's room was at the end of the hallway, spacious and full of flowers. The elderly woman was sitting in bed, with her white hair loose over her shoulders and a yellow shawl over her hospital gown. When she saw Matthew enter, her eyes lit up in a way that even surprised Bridget. "You came!" exclaimed Mrs. Helen, extending her trembling hands. "My guardian angel came to see me." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Matthew approached the bed, moved by the lady's emotion. She held his hands with surprising strength for someone in her condition. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did for me, young man. I was so afraid of that dog, and then you appeared like a gift from heaven." "You don't need to thank me, ma'am. Anyone would have done the same." "No, they wouldn't have." Mrs. Helen shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. "I was on the ground for almost 10 minutes before you showed up. Several people passed by me, but no one stopped. Everyone was in too much of a hurry, too busy, but you stopped. Even with the angry dog, even risking being late, you stopped. Bridget pulled up a chair for Matthew to sit beside her mother. He was visibly moved, and Mrs. Helen wouldn't let go of his hands. "My daughter told me you lost your job because of the delay." Mrs. Helen's voice trembled. "That's my fault." "It's not your fault, Mom. The supervisor had been wanting to fire me for a while. He was just waiting for an excuse. Even so, it's not fair you helped me and were punished for it." As they were talking, the door to the room swung open abruptly. Oliver Brooks entered with a folder under his arm, but froze when he saw Matthew sitting next to the patient. His face turned red with anger. "What are you doing here?" Oliver snarled. "You don't work at this hospital anymore." Matthew stood up, ready to leave without causing trouble, but Mrs. Helen held his wrist firmly. "He's here because I asked him to." Her voice, once sweet, now had a tone of authority that made Oliver swallow hard. "With all due respect, ma'am, but this man is not permitted on the hospital premises. He was fired for just cause." "Just cause?" Mrs. Helen let out a bitter laugh. "And what was the just cause, Mr. Supervisor? Him being 15 minutes late because he was saving an old lady's life on the street?" Oliver opened and closed his mouth a few times, searching for words. The temperature in the room seemed to have dropped several degrees. "I was just following internal regulations, ma'am. Tardiness is not tolerated." "Regulations?" Mrs. Helen repeated the word as if it were poison. "Bridget, dear, please get that document from my purse." Bridget opened her mother's leather purse and took out a yellowed envelope. Mrs. Helen carefully opened it and pulled out several stapled pages. Oliver began to sweat coldly. "Do you know what this is, Mr. Supervisor?" "No, Ma'am." "It's the social statute of Mercy General Hospital. More specifically, the list of shareholders of the institution." Mrs. Helen adjusted the glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "I'll read it to you. Helen Walters Montgomery, 45% of the shares. My late sister, another 20% that were inherited by me. The remainder divided among 5 minor partners." The silence that followed was heavy. Oliver seemed to have seen a ghost. Matthew looked from Mrs. Helen to Bridget, not fully understanding what was happening. You are the owner of the hospital?" "I am the majority shareholder, yes. I built this place with my husband over 30 years ago. He dreamed of having a hospital that treated all people with dignity, regardless of their social status." Mrs. Helen stared fixedly at Oliver. "It seems some employees have forgotten that fundamental principle." Oliver tried to justify himself, his voice trembling. I didn't know who you were. I never saw you in person." "No? You never saw me?" "Because I stepped back from active management after my husband passed away. But that doesn't mean I stopped caring about what happens here." Mrs. Helen handed the documents back to her daughter. "Mr. Supervisor, I want you in the boardroom in exactly 1 hour. We're going to have a conversation about your management methods." Oliver left the room staggering, his face white as paper. As soon as the door closed, Matthew stood up abruptly. "Mrs. Helen, please, don't do anything against him because of me. I don't want to be responsible for someone else losing their job." The elderly woman looked at him with an expression mixing surprise and admiration. "Even after everything he did to you, you still worry about him. He must have a family, bills to pay. I know how hard it is to lose a job. I don't wish that on anyone." Bridget, who had been silent until then, approached Matthew. "You know he doesn't deserve your compassion, don't you?" "Maybe not, but my mother always taught me that 2 wrongs don't make a right. He was unfair to me, but that doesn't mean I should be unfair to him." Mrs. Helen exchanged a meaningful look with her daughter. There was something in that gesture that Matthew couldn't interpret. "Sit down, please," Mrs. Helen requested, and Matthew obeyed. "There's something I need to tell you, something that will change how you see this whole situation." Matthew felt a chill in his stomach. There was something in Mrs. Helen's tone of voice that made him apprehensive. "I didn't fall by accident that Tuesday." "What do you mean?" "Well, I did fall, but it wasn't a random accident. I was testing you." Matthew blinked several times, not understanding. "Testing?" 4 years ago, after my sister passed away, I inherited her share of the hospital and gained majority control. But I was too distant, too immersed in my grief. I wasn't paying attention to how things were being managed. Mrs. Helen sighed. Until a cleaning staff member, a young woman named Jennifer, came to me. She was being harassed by a supervisor but was afraid to report it because she needed the job. The supervisor was Oliver. No, it was another man, who has since been removed. But that opened my eyes. I realized there was a lot happening at the hospital that I was completely unaware of. Employees being mistreated, resources being diverted, patients being discriminated against based on their financial status. Bridget continued her mother's story. That's when we decided to conduct a complete assessment of all departments. We installed security cameras in areas where there weren't any before, hired auditors to review the accounts, started observing the behavior of supervisors and managers. And what does that have to do with me? 6 months ago, we started noticing specific irregularities in the cleaning department. Supplies disappearing, employees being fired for no apparent reason, complaints that never reached management. Everything pointed to Oliver. Mrs. Helen adjusted herself in bed. But he was clever. He covered his tracks very well. We needed concrete evidence, not just suspicions. That's when we came up with the idea of the tests, Bridget explained. My mother started observing the employees through the security cameras, not to spy on them invasively, but to understand how they were treated and how they behaved when they thought no one was watching. Matthew was beginning to understand where this conversation was heading, and he didn't like what he was hearing at all. You watched me? I watched several employees. You, especially, caught my attention because of how you treated everyone. Always kind, always helpful. Even when Oliver humiliated you in front of others, you kept your calm and dignity. Mrs. Helen leaned forward. But watching from afar wasn't enough. I needed to know if that kindness was genuine or just a mask. So you pretended to have fallen to test me. Not exactly. I really did fall. But I was heading to the cemetery, and I had my eye on you since you left for work. Matthew felt his stomach churn. The feeling of being manipulated was nauseating. You followed me to the cemetery. I found out through the hospital's internal system that you always took the same bus at the same time, and that your route passed near the cemetery where my husband is buried. Mrs. Helen didn't look away. It wasn't hard to position myself in the right place at the right time. The aggressive dog was really there, that wasn't planned. But when I saw you approaching, I let things take their natural course. Matthew stood up, feeling betrayed. It had all been a setup from the start. He had lost his job, spent days in anguish, seen his mother worried, all because of a test devised by a wealthy woman who played with people's lives. I need to go. Matthew, please, let me explain. Explain what? He turned to Mrs. Helen, his voice filled with hurt. That you used my kindness against me? That you turned my job into a game? That you made me suffer just to prove some crazy theory? It wasn't like that. No? Then what was it like? Matthew felt tears of anger burning his eyes. Do you know what I've been through this week? I have a sick mother at home who needs expensive medicine. I spent 4 days looking for a job and found nothing. I had to sell water at the traffic light, me, a 34-year-old man, because I had no other options. And all of this why? Because a rich lady wanted to play private investigator. Bridget tried to intervene, but Matthew raised his hand. No, I thanked you for the help. I came here because you asked. But I won't stay and listen to how I was used as a guinea pig in some sick social experiment. He left the room, slamming the door. In the hallway, he had to lean against the wall because his legs were shaking so much he could barely stand. It had all been a lie. Mrs. Helen's gratitude, Bridget's concern, it was all part of an elaborate act. Matthew ran down the stairs, not waiting for the elevator. He needed to get out of that hospital, that place that had only brought him pain and humiliation. When he reached the street, he stopped to breathe, trying to control the torrent of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. That's when he heard a familiar voice calling his name. He turned and saw Jennifer, the cleaning staff who worked the afternoon shift. She was at the bus stop, waving at him. Matthew, is it true you were fired? He approached, still trying to compose himself. It's true, Jennifer. That's outrageous. Oliver is getting worse and worse. She lowered her voice, looking around. You know he fired Charles last week too, right? Charles? But he'd been at the hospital for 7 years. Exactly. Oliver said he was stealing cleaning supplies. But everyone knows that's a lie. Charles can't even look at an ant without feeling guilty. Matthew felt a pang of guilt. He'd been so absorbed in his own problems that he hadn't noticed other people were also suffering from the supervisor's abuses. "Jennifer, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Mrs. Helen Walters, Montgomery, the hospital owner. Has she ever spoken with you?" Jennifer's eyes widened. "How do you know about Mrs. Helen?" "I just met her. She's hospitalized here." "Really?" Jennifer seemed genuinely surprised. "Well, she's never spoken to me personally, but I heard she was the one who got rid of that disgusting supervisor from the 3rd floor, you know, the one who kept harassing the girls." "Do you know anything else about her?" "Just that the old staff speaks very highly of her and her husband. They say they built this hospital from scratch, that they treated all employees like family. But after he passed away, she disappeared. Doesn't come around anymore." Jennifer's bus arrived and she hurriedly said goodbye. Matthew stood still at the stop, processing that information. Maybe he'd been unfair to Mrs. Helen. Maybe her methods were questionable, but her intentions... No. He shook his head. Intentions didn't justify manipulation. No matter how noble the goal, using people that way was wrong. Matthew took the next bus home, physically and emotionally exhausted. When he arrived, he found Mrs. Catherine in the kitchen, making soup with the few ingredients they had. "How did it go, son?" "It didn't work out, Mom. He didn't have the courage to tell the whole truth, that he'd been used as a pawn in a game, that his kindness had been tested like some commodity to be evaluated." Mrs. Catherine sensed there was more than he was saying, but respected his silence. That night, Matthew barely touched his soup. He lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, reliving every moment at the hospital. The expression on Mrs. Helen's face when he accused her of playing with his life, the way Bridget had tried to intervene, and especially the feeling of having been completely deceived. Around 10 at night, there was a knock at the door. Matthew hesitated before opening, wondering who it could be at that hour. On the other side was Bridget, still wearing the blue dress, but with a tired expression on her face. "Can I come in?" "It's late." "I know, but I need to talk to you, please." Matthew glanced back at the small, humble living room. He felt ashamed to receive someone so elegant in his simple home, but knew he couldn't leave her at the door. "Come in?" Mrs. Catherine was in the bedroom, probably already asleep. Matthew offered Bridget the only unbroken chair in the living room and sat on the worn-out sofa. "My mother is very unwell." Bridget began without preamble. "Since you left, she hasn't stopped crying. She doesn't want to have the surgery, doesn't want to eat, doesn't want anything. She just keeps repeating that she ruined everything." "I'm sorry she's unwell, but I'm unwell too, Mrs. Bridget. I was used as a lab rat." "I understand your anger, I truly do. But let me tell you the full story. You deserve to know everything before judging my mother." Matthew crossed his arms defensively, but nodded for her to continue. "When my father passed away, my mother fell into a deep depression. She couldn't get out of bed, didn't want to see anyone, had no interest in anything. It was years of treatment, therapy, medication." Bridget wiped away a tear. "I thought I'd never get my mother back. I'm sorry about that. The hospital was my father's dream. He grew up poor, saw his own mother die because they couldn't afford proper treatment. When he became wealthy through hard work, he vowed he would build a place where all people would be treated with dignity, regardless of what they had in their pockets." Matthew remembered hearing stories about the hospital's founder, about how he had revolutionized care in the city. But after he passed away, things started to change. The new administrators wanted profit above all else. They began treating staff like numbers, patients like customers. Everything my father built was being destroyed, and my mother was too depressed to notice. And when did she notice? It was 4 years ago when that employee came to her. Jennifer, the cleaning lady. She came to our house desperate because she was being harassed by her supervisor and had nowhere to turn. Bridget took a deep breath. My mother got out of bed for the first time in months. She got dressed, went to the hospital, and confronted the man personally. It was like a switch had been flipped. She had a purpose again. And the purpose was testing employees. The purpose was saving my father's dream. But to do that, she needed to know who truly cared about people and who was just there for the paycheck. Bridget leaned forward. "Matthew, you weren't the first she tested. There were others before you. Some passed, others didn't, but none of them reacted like you." "What do you mean?" "My mother pretended to be feeling unwell near 3 different employees at different times. The first called an ambulance and left. The second didn't even stop. The third helped, but then went to HR to ask for a bonus for assisting a patient off the clock." Matthew didn't know what to say. "You were different. Not only did you help without expecting anything in return, but you defended the supervisor who fired you. Even after everything, you still cared about his well-being." Bridget took Matthew's hands. "That's why my mother is so shaken. She finally found someone who embodies the values my father stood for, and she ended up pushing you away with her methods. What does she expect me to do? That I come back and pretend nothing happened? No, she wants to apologize properly, and she wants to do something for you, not as a test or manipulation, but as genuine recognition of who you are." Matthew looked at his own hands, tired from so much work. He thought of his mother sleeping in the room, the medications he owed at the pharmacy, the overdue rent. He also thought about the feeling of being used, the humiliation of being the subject of a social experiment. "I need to think. That's all I ask." Bridget stood up. "But please don't take too long. My mother's surgery is scheduled for the day after tomorrow, and she won't have it if she doesn't get the chance to make things right with you first." After Bridget left, Matthew stayed up late, processing everything he had heard. Part of him was still hurt, feeling manipulated, but another part was starting to understand that perhaps Mrs. Helen wasn't the villain he had imagined. The next morning he woke up with a decision made. He would go to the hospital not for Mrs. Helen but for himself. He needed answers. He needed to fully understand what had happened before moving on. He found Mrs. Helen in the same room, but she seemed to have aged 10 years since the day before. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and she could barely lift her gaze when he entered. "I came to hear what you have to say." Mrs. Helen took a deep breath before beginning. "When my husband passed away, I lost the will to live. He was my partner of over 40 years, my best friend, my everything. For years I stayed locked in the house, sunk in a sadness that seemed to have no end." Her voice was a faint whisper. "The hospital we built together was being destroyed, and I didn't have the strength to fight." Matthew pulled up a chair and sat down, determined to hear everything through to the end. "When Jennifer came to me, it was like something awakened inside me. I realized there were other people suffering, that I had a responsibility toward them, but I had been disconnected for so long that I didn't know where to start." Mrs. Helen looked directly at Matthew. "The tests were my idea, yes, but they weren't about manipulating people. They were about finding allies, people I could trust to help restore the values my husband stood for." "But why not just talk to people? Why all this staging?" "Because words lie, actions don't." Mrs. Helen sighed. "I wanted to see who people really were when they thought no one important was watching. And you, Matthew, showed yourself to be exactly the kind of person this hospital needs." "I'm just a janitor. You're much more than that. You're someone who understands that serving isn't humiliating, it's honorable, who sees dignity in every role, in every person." Mrs. Helen extended her hand to him. "And that's why I want to apologize. Not for the tests themselves, because I believe they were necessary, but for not being transparent with you from the start, for causing unnecessary suffering." Matthew held her hand, feeling the fragility of this woman who appeared so strong. "I accept your apology, but I don't know if I can trust again." "I'm not asking for your trust, not yet." Mrs. Helen smiled weakly. "I'm asking for a chance to earn it." It was then that the door opened and Oliver entered, but this time he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by 2 men in suits whom Matthew recognized as members of the hospital's board, and a woman who appeared to be from internal audit. "Mrs. Helen, as requested, I've brought the reports." One of the directors handed her a thick folder. Oliver was pale, sweating cold. His eyes went from Mrs. Helen to Matthew, as if trying to understand what was happening. "Mr. Oliver Brooks, Mrs. Helen opened the folder. How long have you worked at Mercy General Hospital? 12 years, ma'am. 12 years. And in that time, how many employees have you fired? Oliver hesitated. I don't have that exact number, ma'am. I do. 57 employees, an average of nearly 5 per year. Mrs. Helen flipped through the documents. That is significantly higher than any other supervisor in the institution. Do you have an explanation? Some employees simply didn't meet the job requirements. Interesting, because I analyzed each of those 57 cases. Do you know what I found? Mrs. Helen didn't wait for an answer. 42 of them were rehired by other institutions and maintain stable jobs to this day. 3 started their own businesses. 5 retired voluntarily. Only 7 actually had documented performance issues. The auditor passed more documents to Mrs. Helen. There's also the matter of supplies. Over the last 3 years, the cleaning department has seen a 60% increase in material expenses. At the same time, we have employee complaints about shortages of basic products. Where is this material going, Mr. Brooks? Oliver opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His complexion was the color of ash. We have evidence. The auditor spoke for the first time. Invoices for purchases that never arrived in inventory. Payments to phantom suppliers. Suspicious transfers to personal accounts. I can explain. I'm sure you can, but that explanation will be given to the proper authorities, not to me. Mrs. Helen closed the folder. Mr. Oliver Brooks, you are terminated for just cause, professional misconduct, misappropriation of resources, and systematic moral harassment. Hospital security will accompany you to your locker to collect your belongings. 2 security guards entered the room as if they had been summoned. Oliver looked around, searching for some support, but only found stern gazes. This is absurd. You can't do this to me. We can, and we are. Bridget entered the room, carrying another folder. And in case you think about suing the hospital, I have here statements from 17 employees who suffered verbal and psychological abuse under your supervision. Some are willing to testify. Oliver was escorted out of the room, still protesting. When the door closed, a heavy silence took over the environment. Matthew was shocked by everything he had just witnessed. I said I didn't want him to lose his job. And I respect that, Mrs. Helen replied. But what happened to him wasn't because of you, Matthew. It was the result of years of misconduct. You were just the last drop in a glass that had been overflowing for a long time. One of the directors approached Matthew. Mr. Thompson, on behalf of Mercy General Hospital, I would like to formally apologize for the way you were treated. Your dismissal was unfair and will be nullified in our records. If you wish, you can return to your position immediately, with back pay for the period you were away. Matthew looked at Mrs. Helen, confused. No, she said, I don't want you to come back as a janitor. Matthew's heart tightened. So, all that had just been a show, and he would still be unemployed in the end. I want you to take over as supervisor of the cleaning department. What? You heard right. I want you to be the new supervisor. Mrs. Helen adjusted herself in bed. But before that, there are a few things I need to know. Bridget, can you pass me that other document? Bridget handed an envelope to her mother, who opened it carefully. Matthew Thompson, 34 years old, graduated in hospital administration from the Regional College of Health Sciences. Mrs. Helen raised her gaze. Why was a man with a college degree working as a janitor? Matthew felt his face heat up with shame. How did you... Background check, standard procedure before any promotion. Mrs. Helen didn't look away. I'm waiting for your answer. Matthew took a deep breath. It was a story he rarely told, one that deeply shamed him. I graduated 6 years ago. I was so happy, I thought I would finally get a good job, that I could give a better life to my mother. His voice faltered a bit. But no one wanted to hire me. They said I had no experience. How was I supposed to get experience if no one gave me a chance? Mrs. Helen nodded for him to continue. After a year of searching, I was desperate. The bills piling up, my mother needing medical care. That's when I saw the janitor position at the hospital. I thought at least I would be in the healthcare field, that maybe I could move up later. Matthew laughed bitterly. What a fool I was. You weren't a fool. You were a survivor. Mrs. Helen spoke firmly. "And you were humble enough to accept any decent work instead of thinking you were above it. That's not a reason for shame, it's a reason for pride." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. So, you're offering me the supervisor position even though you know I have a degree? No. I'm offering it because you have the degree and the compassion, because you understand the work from the inside. You've been at the bottom. You've felt what it's like to be treated as inferior. Mrs. Helen leaned forward. But you don't have the necessary experience. Not yet. That's why I'm going to propose something different. What would that be? I'm going to hire you as an administrative assistant. You will work directly with me and the board, learning how the hospital operates from the inside. You'll take a specialization course in hospital management, which I will fund, and after a year, if all goes well, you take over the supervisor role. Matthew Thompson couldn't believe what he was hearing. It seemed too good to be true. Why are you doing this, really? Because my husband always said that character is more important than a resume, that we can teach skills, but we can't teach kindness. Mrs. Helen took his hand again. And because I saw in you the same sparkle in your eyes that my husband had, that genuine desire to help people. Bridget Walters approached as well. There's one more thing. Your mother, Mrs. Catherine, right? Is she sick? Matthew nodded, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. She has heart problems. She needs constant medication and regular checkups. We have an excellent cardiologist at the hospital, Dr. Harold Taylor. He is the best in the region. Bridget exchanged a look with her mother. We would like to offer her complete treatment, appointments, tests, medication, everything covered by the health plan you will have as an administrative employee. I can't accept all this. It's too much. It's not charity, Matthew. It's an investment. Mrs. Helen spoke firmly. I am investing in someone who can help restore what was built here, but I'm also doing it because it's the right thing. You helped me when I was down. Now let me repay you. Matthew felt tears streaming down his face, not tears of sadness or anger, but of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Mrs. Helen smiled. And then go home and tell your mother that things are going to get better. Matthew spent the rest of the day sorting out the paperwork for his reinstatement and promotion. He met the Human Resources Department, received a new badge with his photo and the title of Administrative Assistant to the Board. Every time he looked at that piece of plastic, he had trouble believing it was real. In the late afternoon, he went to Mrs. Helen's room to say goodbye. She was alone, reading a book that looked very old. How are you feeling? Better, much better. She closed the book. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning. The doctor says it's simple, but at my age, nothing is that simple. You will be fine. I hope so. I still have a lot to do. Mrs. Helen pointed to the chair. Sit for a while. There's something I'd like to talk to you about. Matthew sat down, curious. When I said I was testing employees, I didn't tell the whole story. Mrs. Helen adjusted the shawl over her shoulders. I wasn't just testing to find good people. I was testing to find a successor. A successor? I'm 73, Matthew. I'm not eternal. Someone will have to take care of the hospital when I'm no longer here. Bridget is an excellent lawyer, but she doesn't have the same love for the healthcare field that my husband and I had. She paused. I was looking for someone who not only had technical competence, but also had their heart in the right place. And you think that's me? I don't know yet. That's why I want you to work with me, to learn, to show me what you're capable of. Mrs. Helen held his hand. But what I've seen so far gives me a lot of hope. Matthew left the hospital with his head spinning. Everything had changed so fast he could barely process it. The week before, he was selling water at the traffic light. Now, he had an administrative job and the possibility of a future he had never dared to dream of. When he got home, he found Mrs. Catherine in the living room, trying to fix the sofa that was torn. Mom, you can stop that. We're going to be able to buy a new sofa. Matthew, I know you're trying to be optimistic, but it's not optimism, Mom. It's reality. He knelt before her, taking her hands. I got a job, a real job in my field, with a good salary, health insurance, everything. Mrs. Catherine looked at him in disbelief. How? Matthew told the whole story. Mrs. Helen's fall, the tests, Oliver's dismissal, the job offer. His mother listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. I always knew your kindness would be rewarded one day. She hugged her son tightly. Your father would be so proud of you. That night, for the first time in months, Matthew slept well. He didn't dream of overdue bills or the pharmacy refusing his mother's medicine. He dreamed of the future, of possibilities, of hope. The next morning, he arrived early at the hospital for his first day in the new position. Bridget was waiting for him at reception, wearing a black suit and a serious expression. Good morning, Matthew. My mother's surgery starts in an hour. She asked if you could stay here during the procedure. Of course, I'd like that very much. They went up to the surgical center. Mrs. Helen was already being prepped for surgery when they arrived. She smiled when she saw Matthew. You came. I promised I'd stay. He held her hand. Everything will be fine. I know, because now I have something to come back to. Mrs. Helen squeezed his hand tightly. Take care of my hospital while I'm on the table, okay? You can count on it. The surgery lasted 3 hours. Matthew and Bridget spent that time in the waiting room talking about the hospital, about Mrs. Helen's plans, about the future. It was during this conversation that Matthew began to understand the magnitude of what was being offered to him. Mercy General Hospital wasn't just a hospital. It was a legacy, a dream that 2 people had built from scratch with the purpose of making a difference in people's lives. And Mrs. Helen was, slowly but deliberately, passing that legacy on to him. When the doctor finally came out of the operating room, he brought good news. The surgery had been a success. Mrs. Helen was in recovery and would soon be moved to her room. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Helen was discharged. Matthew went to visit her at home, accepting the invitation Bridget had extended. The Walters mansion was even bigger than he had imagined. Expansive gardens, a huge swimming pool, bedrooms that seemed the size of his entire house. But what impressed Matthew the most was the loneliness of the place. Despite all the beauty and wealth, the house seemed empty, cold. Mrs. Helen was sitting on the porch, looking at the garden she tended herself. It's too big for one person, isn't it? She said when she noticed Matthew observing the property. It's very beautiful. Beautiful but lonely. My husband and I dreamed of filling this house with children and grandchildren, but we only managed to have Bridget. And she grew up, built her own life. Mrs. Helen sighed. Sometimes I sit here, imagining what it would be like if we had had more children. You still have a lot ahead of you. You could meet someone, start over. At 73, she laughed. No, my time for those things has passed. But it doesn't mean I can't have a family in another way. Matthew didn't understand what she meant, but he didn't press the matter. In the following months, his routine changed completely. He woke up early, took his mother to her appointments when necessary, then went to the hospital where he spent the day learning about administration, resource management, supplier relations. Mrs. Helen was a demanding but patient teacher, always willing to explain something a 5th or 6th time if needed. Bridget also became a constant presence in his life. She helped him with legal matters, taught him about contracts and labor laws. Gradually, Matthew realized that she was different from what he had imagined at their first meeting. Behind that formal and serious appearance was a sensitive and dedicated woman. It was during one of these study sessions that Bridget mentioned something that caught Matthew completely off guard. Did you know my mother went through severe depression after my father passed away? She mentioned something about it. It wasn't just sadness, Matthew. It was something much deeper. She tried— Bridget paused, her voice breaking. She tried to take her own life twice. Matthew felt the air leave his lungs. I didn't know. Nobody knows. We managed to keep it secret. But those were the hardest years of my life. Seeing my mother, who had always been so strong, so determined, completely broken. Bridget wiped away a tear. That's why when she finally found purpose again, I supported her completely, even if her methods were questionable. The tests. Yes, They were the only thing that kept her alive in recent years. The idea that she could honor my father's memory, that she could make a difference. Bridget looked at Matthew. And then you appeared. And for the first time in 10 years, I saw my mother genuinely smile. Matthew didn't know what to say. The weight of that revelation was enormous. I don't want you to feel obligated to her because of this, Bridget quickly added, but I wanted you to understand how much you mean to her. You're not just a project or a potential successor. You gave her back her life. This conversation changed something in Matthew. He began to see Mrs. Helen not as a benefactor or employer, but as a person. A woman who had suffered immense losses and was trying to find meaning again. That's why when she invited him to dinner at the mansion along with Mrs. Catherine, he accepted immediately. The dinner was simple but cozy. Mrs. Helen had prepared the food herself, insisting she didn't want any help from staff. The two mothers chatted animatedly, discovering they had much in common. Both were widows, both had raised children alone, both had faced hardships that made them stronger. "Did you know I also came from a poor family?" Mrs. Helen told Mrs. Catherine. "I grew up in a slum, sharing one room with 8 siblings. Really? But you're so elegant, so refined." "That came with time, and with lots of help from my husband. He taught me to read properly, enrolled me in courses, showed me a world I didn't even know existed." Mrs. Helen looked at Matthew. "That's why I believe so strongly in education and opportunities. If someone had given me a chance when I was young, I would have gone far much earlier." The evening stretched on with stories, laughter, and, at times, tears. When they finally said goodbye, Mrs. Catherine held Mrs. Helen's hands. "Thank you for looking after my son." "Thank you for raising him so well," Mrs. Helen replied. On the way home, Mrs. Catherine said something that made Matthew think. "That woman is very lonely. She has Bridget. Yes, but it's not the same. Bridget has her own life, her own apartment. Mrs. Helen stays in that huge mansion alone, with only memories for company." Mrs. Catherine looked out the taxi window. "That's no life for anyone." Matthew silently agreed. In the following days, he began observing more closely. Mrs. Helen arrived early at the hospital and left late, as if avoiding going home. During breaks, she stayed in her office looking at old photos of her husband. It was during one of these moments that Matthew knocked on the door and entered uninvited. "I need to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest with me." Mrs. Helen seemed surprised by his tone. "Of course, what is it? Why did you really choose me? And don't give me that story about tests and values. I want the truth." Mrs. Helen remained silent for a long moment, looking at her hands. "You remind me of my son." "But you only had Bridget." "I had another child before her. Ryan." Mrs. Helen's voice trembled. "He was born with heart problems. He only lived 3 days." Matthew sat down slowly, realizing he was about to hear something very intimate. "After him, the doctors said I couldn't have any more children. The delivery was very complicated. There were lasting effects. Bridget was a miracle, an adoption we managed years later." Mrs. Helen picked up a photo from a frame on the table. It showed a tiny baby with tubes and wires everywhere. "I wonder every day what Ryan would have been like if he had lived. What kind of man he would have become. And do you think he would have been like me? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not." She put the photo away again. "But when I saw you helping that elderly lady on the street, when I saw your genuine kindness, I thought, this is how I would have wanted my son to be." Matthew felt tears burning his eyes. "So I'm some kind of replacement?" "No, you are you, unique and special in your own right." Mrs. Helen stood up and went to the window. "But I won't lie and say there's no emotional component in my decision. There is, and I hope you can understand that." "I understand." "Do you really? Because I know it's a lot to put on someone. This expectation, this projection." Mrs. Helen turned to him. "If it's too much, if you want to leave, I understand." "I don't want to leave," Matthew replied firmly. "But I want to make something clear. I am not Ryan, I never will be. I can honor his memory by being the best version of myself, but I can't be him. I'm not asking for that. Maybe not consciously, but I've noticed how you look at me sometimes, as if you're seeing someone else." Matthew stepped closer. "I can be your friend, your pupil, even someone you consider family. But I need you to see me as Matthew, not as the shadow of who could have been." Mrs. Helen stared at him for a long moment, and then something shifted in her expression, as if a mask had fallen. "You're right. I'm sorry. No need to apologize. You just need to see me for real." From that day on, their relationship changed. It became more honest, more real. Mrs. Helen stopped projecting him as the son she lost and started getting to know him for who he truly was. And surprisingly, this brought them even closer. The months flew by. Matthew was in the middle of his specialization course when he received an urgent call from Bridget. It was the middle of the night, and her voice was shaky. "Matthew, I need you to come to the hospital. Now." "What happened?" "It's my mother. She had a heart attack." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The world stopped. Matthew dressed hurriedly, woke Mrs. Catherine to let her know, and rushed to the hospital. When he reached the ICU, he found Bridget sitting on the hallway floor, hugging her knees, crying. What did the doctors say? That the next few hours are critical. Bridget lifted her tear-streaked face. She was at home alone. She was lucky the caretaker heard when she fell. If it had taken a few more minutes. Matthew sat beside her on the cold hospital floor. They stayed there in silence, waiting for news that was slow to come. Sometime during the night, Mrs. Catherine appeared, bringing coffee and sandwiches that neither of them could eat. When the sun finally rose, the doctor came out of the ICU with a tired but hopeful expression. "She's stable. She's not out of danger yet, but we managed to stabilize her." He looked at Bridget. "She's asking for someone named Matthew." Bridget pushed Matthew forward. "Go. She wants you." Matthew entered the ICU with his heart in his mouth. Mrs. Helen was connected to various machines, pale as paper, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. "My son," she whispered with difficulty. Matthew held her hand, trying not to cry. "I'm here, you can relax. I need to tell you." Each word seemed to take immense effort. The will. "Don't think about that now. You're going to be fine. Listen." She squeezed his hand with surprising strength. I changed everything. You and Bridget, you two will share." "Mrs. Helen, please save your strength. No, you need to know." A tear rolled down her face. "You gave me back my will to live. Now I need to stay to watch you grow." "Then stay. Fight. Don't leave me now." Mrs. Helen smiled weakly before closing her eyes. The monitors beeped, and immediately a medical team rushed into the ICU. Matthew was pushed out, back to the hallway where Bridget waited with wide, fearful eyes. What happened? She stopped talking. The following hours were a blur. Doctors coming and going, nurses running, machines beeping. Matthew, Bridget, and Mrs. Catherine clung to each other, forming a small island of mutual support amid the hospital chaos. It was only when the afternoon was well advanced that the doctor finally came out with definitive news. "She's stable again. It was close, but we managed." He sighed heavily. "However, I need to be honest with you. She'll need intensive care for the next few months. She can't be alone. She needs constant medical supervision." "She can stay at my house," Bridget said immediately. "I'll hire nurses, convert a room." "No," Mrs. Catherine spoke, surprising everyone. "She'll stay at our house." "But Mrs. Catherine, with all due respect, you don't have the setup for—" "Then we'll make it work." Mrs. Catherine interrupted Bridget. "That woman is sick from loneliness as much as from heart problems. She needs to be with people with life around her, not locked away in a mansion bedroom." Matthew looked at his mother, proud of her generosity, but worried about the logistics. "Mom, our house only has 2 bedrooms where I'll sleep in the living room. Mrs. Helen will stay in my room, which is bigger and has better ventilation." Mrs. Catherine was firm. "I won't take no for an answer. Bridget started crying again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need to thank me. It's what you do for family." The word family echoed in the hospital hallway like a promise. Not a family by blood, but a chosen family, built on foundations of compassion and genuine care. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Helen was discharged. Bridget hired a nurse to accompany her during the day, but at night and on weekends it was Matthew and Mrs. Catherine who took care of her. The small house became even smaller with one more person, but it also became fuller of life. Mrs. Helen and Mrs. Catherine became inseparable. They spent hours talking about their lives, about their children, about dreams fulfilled and unfulfilled. Bridget visited every day after work, often staying for dinner. Matthew divided his time between work at the hospital and caring for the two mothers. It was during one of these evenings that Mrs. Helen had an idea. "Mrs. Catherine, what do you think about us moving in together?" "But we're already living together. Not here in my house. There's plenty of space, and that way you wouldn't have to sleep on the sofa." Mrs. Helen held her friend's hand. "And I wouldn't have to go back to that empty, cold mansion." Mrs. Catherine looked at Matthew, seeking his opinion. "It's your decision, Mum." "It would be nice to have a garden to tend to again, and a real bedroom," Mrs. Catherine admitted. "But I don't want to be seen as someone who's taking advantage." "Taking advantage?" Mrs. Helen laughed. "You're saving me from loneliness. I'm the one who should worry about taking advantage." And so it was that, 3 months after the heart attack, the two families merged. The Walters mansion gained new residents. Mrs. Catherine took one of the guest rooms, which she turned into her personal sanctuary. Matthew Thompson occupied another, decorated simply but comfortably. Bridget Walters kept her apartment, but spent so many weekends at the house that she practically lived there too. The move brought new life to the property. Mrs. Helen returned to tending the garden, now with Mrs. Catherine's help. The two women established a pleasant routine. They woke early to walk through the gardens, then had coffee together while planning their day. In the afternoons they received visitors or did crafts together, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. Matthew noticed that some long-time hospital employees had started viewing him with suspicion. There were whispers about how he'd obtained his position, insinuations about favoritism and nepotism. It was during a management meeting that the situation exploded. One of the senior managers, a man named Robert Sanders, openly questioned Matthew's presence. "With all due respect, Mrs. Helen, but the young man barely has any experience. Wouldn't it be wiser to hire someone with more mileage?" "Matthew is here because he has the necessary qualifications," Mrs. Helen replied calmly. "The qualifications or your fondness for him?" Robert persisted, and a murmur spread through the room. Matthew felt his face grow hot, but before he could respond, Bridget stood up. "Mr. Sanders, Matthew's resume is available for anyone to review. He has a degree in hospital administration and is completing a specialization in health management. Plus, he has 5 years of work experience in this institution, knowing its operations from the inside. Experience as a janitor, not as a manager. And isn't that ground-level knowledge valuable?" Bridget crossed her arms. "How many of our current managers can understand the real needs of frontline staff? How many have cleaned a hospital bathroom or carried linens through the halls?" The awkward silence that followed was answer enough. "I know my rise has been fast," Matthew finally spoke, his voice firm, "and I know some here think I don't deserve to be at this table. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm not ready yet." He looked around the room. "But I'm here to learn, to contribute, and to make a difference. If anyone thinks I'm not doing a good job, my office door is always open for feedback." Robert didn't seem satisfied, but said nothing more. The meeting continued, but tension hung in the air. Later, in Mrs. Helen's office, Matthew vented. "Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm moving too fast." "Nonsense!" Mrs. Helen left no room for doubt. "Robert is a dinosaur afraid of change. He's been here 20 years and never proposed a single innovation. Even so, he has experience. Maybe I should..." "Should what?" "Make yourself small so others feel comfortable." Mrs. Helen slapped the desk. "No, you earned your place here. Don't let anyone take that from you." Matthew knew she was right, but Robert's comment left him unsettled. He began working even harder, arriving before everyone else and leaving last. He wanted to prove he deserved to be there, that he wasn't just Mrs. Helen's favorite. It was during one of these late work nights that he found something strange in the financial reports. There were small but consistent discrepancies in one department's budget, money going out that wasn't properly accounted for. Matthew took his findings to Bridget, who immediately requested a full audit. What they discovered was shocking. Robert Sanders had been embezzling funds for years, using a complex scheme of fake invoices and phantom suppliers. The scandal shook the hospital. Robert was fired and sued, but the damage to the institution's reputation was significant. It took a joint effort from the entire board to restore trust, both among employees and the public, and it was during this crisis that Matthew truly proved his worth. He proposed a complete overhaul of the internal audit processes, implemented transparency systems, and organized open meetings where employees could express their concerns directly to the management. Slowly, the hospital began to recover, and with that, Matthew's reputation also solidified. The whispers of nepotism faded, replaced by genuine respect for his work. 1 year after starting as an administrative assistant, Matthew was officially promoted to supervisor of the cleaning department, fulfilling the original agreement with Mrs. Helen. But he didn't stop there. He implemented significant changes in the department, better working conditions, regular training, and an appreciation program that publicly recognized the best employees. It was at one of the recognition ceremonies that Jennifer, the employee who had been one of the first to support him, stepped onto the stage to receive her certificate. She looked at Matthew with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for not forgetting where you came from." "I will never forget, Jennifer, I promise." The changes Matthew implemented began to attract attention outside the hospital. Other healthcare institutions wanted to know how he had managed to reduce employee turnover by 40%. Specialized magazines requested interviews. Universities invited him to give lectures. But with success also came new challenges. Some companies began to offer tempting proposals for him to leave Mercy General Hospital. Higher salaries, better benefits, higher positions. It was during a family dinner that he shared one of these offers. A large hospital network from New York wanted to hire him as human resources director with a salary 3 times higher than what he was earning. "You should accept it." Mrs. Catherine surprised everyone. "It's an incredible opportunity." "Mom, no, let me finish." She took her son's hand. "You've spent your life taking care of me, sacrificing for me. Now it's time for you to think about your future, about building your own life." Mrs. Helen, who had been quiet until then, spoke with a choked voice. "Your mother is right. We can't be selfish and keep you here." Matthew looked from one to the other, then at Bridget, who also seemed to be holding back tears. "What if I don't want to go?" "What do you mean?" Mrs. Catherine asked. "What if I've already found my place? What if money isn't the most important thing to me?" Matthew looked around the table at the people who had become his family. "You've all given me something no salary can buy, a purpose, a place where I belong." "But Matthew—" "No, Mom. You need to understand. When I was a cleaner, I saw how the employees were treated. I saw the frustration, the discouragement, the lack of hope, and now I have the chance to change that, to make a difference in the lives of real people." He paused. "How can you think I would give that up for more money?" The silence that followed was filled with emotion. It was Bridget who finally spoke, her voice trembling. "You know my mother is planning to leave you a part of the hospital in her will, don't you?" Matthew nodded. Mrs. Helen had mentioned it briefly when she was in the ICU. "But she never explained exactly what that means," Bridget continued. "It's not just shares or money, it's a responsibility. It's continuing the legacy my parents built." "I know. And that's exactly what I want to do." Mrs. Helen rose from the chair with some difficulty and walked over to Matthew. She placed her hands on his face, forcing him to look directly into her eyes. "Are you sure? Because once you accept this, there's no turning back. You'll be tied to this place, to these people, to this mission." Her voice was serious, almost stern. "And it's going to be hard. There will be days when you'll want to give up, days when you'll question if you made the right choice." "I know. But I also know I can't imagine doing anything else." Then it's decided. Mrs. Helen smiled, and it was as if the sun had come out after a storm. Let's start preparing you to take over the executive leadership. In the following months, Matthew's work pace intensified even more. He attended all board meetings, learned about hospital finances, negotiations with health plans, crisis management. Mrs. Helen was a demanding mentor, but also generous with her teachings. It was during this period that Matthew began to notice changes in Bridget's behavior. She had always been professional and cordial, but lately she seemed to be avoiding him. When they needed to work together, she maintained an almost cold distance. He tried to ignore it, thinking he was imagining things. But when she missed 3 family dinners in a row, he realized something was wrong. He decided to confront her. He went to her law office on a Friday afternoon without warning. "Matthew, what are you doing here? I came to talk to you. You're avoiding me." "I'm not." "Yes, you are. And I want to know why." Bridget sighed, taking off her glasses and massaging her forehead. "It's nothing you've done." "Then is it something I failed to do?" "It's complicated, Matthew." "Then explain it to me." "We're friends, or at least I thought we were." Bridget remained silent for a long moment, clearly struggling with something inside. Finally, she spoke, but without looking at him. "I've been distancing myself because I need space. From you." "Why?" "Because I'm developing feelings I shouldn't have." The words came out in a rush, as if she had been holding them back for a long time. "Feelings for you." Matthew was frozen, not knowing how to react. "I know it's wrong. You're my mother's protégé, you live in our house, you're practically family, but I can't help it." Bridget finally faced him. "And before you say anything, I don't expect you to feel the same. I just needed to step back before it got harder." "Bridget, please don't make this harder than it already is. I'll continue to be professional when we need to work together, and I'll keep visiting my mother. But I need this space. I need time to get over this." Matthew knew he should say something, but the words wouldn't come. He liked Bridget, of course. He admired her intelligence, her dedication, her strength. But he had never thought of her romantically. Or had he? "I need to think." "No, you don't." Bridget raised her hand. "I don't want an answer now. I don't want you to feel pressured. I just want you to know the truth, to understand why I need distance." Matthew left Bridget's office more confused than ever. He spent the entire weekend processing that revelation. He looked at Bridget with new eyes, remembering shared moments, deep conversations, laughter, and even some comfortable silences. It was Mrs. Catherine who noticed something was wrong. "What happened between you and Bridget? Why do you think something happened?" "My son. I'm not blind. You two are avoiding even looking at each other." She sat next to him in the garden. "Do you want to talk about it?" Matthew told her everything. Bridget's confession, his own confusion, the fear of ruining everything. "And what do you feel for her?" "I don't know, Mom. I never stopped to think about it." "Then maybe it's time you did." Mrs. Catherine stroked her son's hair like she used to when he was a child. "You spend so much time thinking about others, taking care of everyone, that you forget to look into your own heart. But what if I don't feel the same way? What if I hurt her? What if you do? What if you're letting the chance for happiness pass you by out of fear?" Mrs. Catherine smiled. "Sometimes, my son, the biggest risk is not taking any risk at all." Matthew spent the following weeks observing his own feelings. He noticed how his mood improved when Bridget showed up, how worried he got when she didn't get in touch, how her laugh had become a sound he eagerly awaited. And then, on a rainy afternoon, while they were reviewing contracts at the office, she laughed at something he said. It was a genuine, carefree laugh, and in that moment Matthew knew. "Bridget." "Yes?" "I have feelings for you too." She stopped mid-sentence, the document forgotten in her hands. "What?" "It took me a while to realize it, but they're there. They've been there for some time, I think. I was just too busy to pay attention." Matthew stepped closer. "And if you're still willing, I'd like to give it a try. For real." Bridget didn't answer with words. She simply stood up and kissed him. A gentle kiss, but one filled with promise. When they told Mrs. Helen and Mrs. Catherine, the two women exchanged a meaningful look before smiling. "You knew?" Matthew asked, incredulous. "My son, even a blind man could see the chemistry between you two." Mrs. Catherine laughed. "I was just waiting for you to realize it." Mrs. Helen added, "And I was sure you would. It was only a matter of time." Matthew and Bridget's relationship blossomed naturally and organically. They didn't rush anything, building their relationship on the solid foundation of friendship and mutual respect that was already there. 2 years after their first meeting on the street, on a rainy Tuesday that changed everything, Matthew was promoted to Executive Director of Mercy General Hospital. The ceremony was simple but moving, with staff from all departments present. In his inaugural speech, Matthew looked at the people gathered in the auditorium. 2 years ago, I was a janitor who got fired for being 15 minutes late. 15 minutes I spent helping an elderly lady who had fallen on the street. He paused, letting the irony of fate hang in the air. Today, I stand here as the executive director of this institution, and I know many wonder, how was this possible? He searched for Mrs. Helen in the audience, who was sitting next to Mrs. Catherine. It was possible because someone believed that kindness is worth more than a resume. That character is more important than experience, that the purpose of a hospital isn't profit, but to serve people. Matthew took a deep breath. "And I promise, to every person in this room, that I will honor that trust, that I will work every day to make this place not just the best hospital technically, but also the best hospital humanly." The applause was thunderous, but for Matthew, what mattered was the proud smile of the two mothers and Bridget's loving gaze. The following years were ones of growth and transformation. Under Matthew's leadership, Mercy General Hospital implemented innovative programs, an assistance fund for employees facing financial difficulties, a scholarship program for workers' children, and an open-door policy where anyone could schedule a meeting with the management. But the project Matthew was most proud of was the Second Chance program. Inspired by his own story, he created a system where the hospital hired people in socially vulnerable situations, giving them training and an opportunity to rebuild their lives. Charles, the employee who had been unfairly fired by Oliver, was one of the first to be rehired. Jennifer was promoted to cleaning coordinator, and dozens of other people had their lives transformed. Matthew's story began to spread. Local, then national newspapers began covering the Mercy General Hospital miracle, how an institution on the brink of financial and moral collapse became a national benchmark for compassionate care and participatory management. But Matthew always deflected the credit. "It's not me, it's Mrs. Helen who had the vision. It's Bridget, who ensured everything was done legally. It's Mrs. Catherine, who taught me the values that guide every decision. It's every employee who wakes up each day and chooses to give their best." It was during one of these interviews that the reporter asked a question that took him by surprise. "But if you could go back in time, would you change anything? Would you take the janitor job again, knowing all the suffering that would follow?" Matthew didn't hesitate. "Yes, without a doubt, because that job taught me to see people, to understand that no work is beneath anyone, only that some people don't respect the work of others." He smiled. "And because it was as a janitor that I learned the most important lessons a manager can learn: empathy, respect, and humility." 5 years after the life-changing dismissal, Matthew and Bridget married. The ceremony was in the mansion's garden, simple but beautiful. Mrs. Helen and Mrs. Catherine, now inseparable, cried with emotion throughout the event. During the toast, Mrs. Helen stood up with some difficulty, leaning on her cane. "When I met Matthew, I saw in him something I thought was lost forever. Hope. Hope that good people still exist in this world. Hope that kindness isn't weakness. Hope that the legacy my husband and I built wouldn't die with us." She raised her glass. "Today, I see my son and my daughter beginning a new journey together, and I know the future is in good hands." The celebration lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and much joy. But the moment Matthew would cherish most was when he danced with Mrs. Helen. She was fragile, her steps slow, but her eyes shone with life. "Thank you for not giving up on me," Matthew whispered. "Thank you for stopping to help an old stranger on the street," she replied, smiling. "You saved much more than my life that day, my son. You saved my soul." 3 years after the wedding, Bridget discovered she was pregnant. The news filled the mansion with renewed joy. Mrs. Helen and Mrs. Catherine immediately began making plans, discussing names, nursery decor, and baby supplies. The birth occurred on a spring morning, full of sunshine and promise. When Matthew held his son for the first time, a boy with dark eyes and rosy cheeks, he felt an emotion so intense he could barely breathe. "What shall we name him?" Bridget asked, tired but radiant. Matthew looked at her, then at Mrs. Helen, watching from the doorway, leaning on Mrs. Catherine. Ryan Walters Thompson." Mrs. Helen began to cry, tears of joy and healing streaming down her wrinkled face. The name of the son she had lost, now reborn in the grandson who had just entered the world. The following years were a whirlwind of diapers, sleepless nights, first steps and first words. Ryan grew up surrounded by love, not just from his parents, but also from 2 grandmothers who spoiled him endlessly. Mrs. Helen, despite her advanced age, insisted on being part of everything. She told her grandson stories, taught him about the flowers in the garden, and passed on the values she and her husband had always upheld. It was during one such afternoon in the garden that Mrs. Helen suffered a second heart attack. This time, there was no saving her. She passed away peacefully with her family around her, holding the hand of Ryan, who was just 5 years old. The grief was deep, but not bitter. Mrs. Helen had lived far beyond what the doctors predicted after her first heart attack. She had seen her hospital prosper, seen her chosen family grow, met her grandson, and helped raise him in his early years. In her will, as promised, she left the hospital equally divided between Matthew and Bridget, with one condition: that they keep alive the spirit of humanization and dignity that had always guided the institution. She also left a letter for Matthew, which he only opened weeks after the funeral, when he finally found the courage. "My dear son of the heart, if you're reading this, it means my journey has come to an end. Don't be sad for me. I lived more than I deserved, loved more than I dreamed, and was happier in recent years than I ever imagined possible after losing my husband. You gave me that. Your kindness, your compassion, your genuine love for people. You not only saved my life that Tuesday morning, you gave me a reason to live again. I want you to know that there wasn't a single day I regretted testing you, because I found not just a successor for the hospital, but a son for my heart and a father for my grandson. You completed our family in a way I didn't even know it was incomplete. Take care of my hospital. Take care of my daughter. Take care of my grandson. And most of all, take care of yourself. Keep being that wonderful person who stops on a rainy Tuesday to help a stranger. Keep believing that kindness isn't weakness. Keep proving that humanity and success can go hand in hand. You are and always will be the son I lost, and the universe returned to me in another form. With all my eternal love, Helen." Matthew kept the letter in a special frame next to a photo of Mrs. Helen smiling in the garden with Ryan in her lap. Mrs. Catherine was devastated by the loss of her friend. The two had become so close it was hard to imagine one without the other. But she was strong and channeled her pain into caring even more for her grandson. Mercy General Hospital continued to grow and innovate. Under the leadership of Matthew and Bridget, it became not just a reference in medical treatment, but also in humane management and social responsibility. Matthew never forgot his roots. Once a month he would clean one of the hospital hallways himself, wearing the same uniform he had when he was a janitor. New employees were shocked to see the CEO with a mop in hand, but the old-timers knew that ritual. "It's to remember where I came from," he explained to those who asked, "and to make sure I never forget that every job in this hospital is important and deserves respect." Ryan grew up watching his father and absorbing these lessons. When he turned 15, he asked to intern at the hospital, not in the administrative areas, but in cleaning, following in his father's footsteps. "I want to understand how things really work," he explained, "not from the office, but from the ground up." Matthew felt his eyes well up with pride. His son had understood the lesson that took him years to learn himself. It was during this internship that Ryan found an elderly lady who had fallen in the hospital parking lot. She had tripped and hurt her knee. Without hesitation, the boy helped her up, cleaned the wound with supplies from his backpack, and insisted on accompanying her to the emergency room. When Matthew heard the story, a shiver ran down his spine. History repeating itself, but in a different way. This time there was no test or manipulation, just genuine kindness being passed from generation to generation. The lady ended up being a regular patient at the hospital and always made sure to thank Ryan when she saw him. The boy would get embarrassed, insisting he had only done the obvious. "That humility," Bridget remarked one evening watching her son. "He got it from you," Matthew corrected. "He inherited it from his grandmother Catherine, who taught me, and from Mrs. Helen, who showed me its value, and from you, who helped me understand that helping others doesn't diminish us, it makes us greater." 20 years after that rainy Tuesday that changed everything, Matthew was in the mansion's garden, now with a few grey hairs on his head, but still strong and active. Mrs. Catherine, at 85 years old, was sitting in the same chair where Mrs. Helen used to sit, knitting a scarf for the great-grandchild on the way. "Mom, can I ask you a question?" "Of course, my son. Do you think things happened as they should? That there was a purpose in all of that?" Mrs. Catherine stopped knitting and looked at her son with that wise gaze only mothers have. "I don't know if there was a predetermined purpose, but I know you created a purpose." She took his hand. "You could have grown bitter about the dismissal. You could have held a grudge against Mrs. Helen for the tests. You could have chosen the easier path, the higher salary, the more comfortable life. But you didn't. You chose the path of the heart. And I would choose it again." Matthew smiled. 1,000 times I would choose it again. Ryan appeared on the veranda, now a 20-year-old young man, studying medicine. "Dad, there's a new employee downstairs asking to speak with you. He says it's urgent." Matthew went down the stairs and found a young man, not much older than Ryan, with worn-out clothes and a nervous expression. "Mr. Thompson, my name is Joshua Parker. I just got fired from the hospital where I worked for being late to help someone on the street." The young man swallowed hard. "I heard your story. I thought maybe you could give me a chance." Matthew looked at that young man and saw himself 20 years ago. He saw the desperation, hope, fighting against the fear of being rejected again. "Do you know why you were fired from the place you worked?" "Because I was 15 minutes late, helping an old man who had fallen off his bicycle. There was a car almost hitting him. I had to pull him to the sidewalk, wait for the ambulance. And your boss didn't understand? He said rules are rules, that the reason didn't matter." Joshua Parker lowered his head. "I know I don't have much experience, sir, but I work hard, I'm punctual, I'm honest, and apparently you're also compassionate." Matthew put his hand on the young man's shoulder. "Compassionate enough to risk your own job to help a stranger." He smiled. "Monday, 8 in the morning, report to HR. We'll give you a chance." Joshua Parker's eyes widened in disbelief. "Really?" "Really, but with one condition. Never lose that kindness. No matter how much you grow professionally, no matter how high you climb, never stop being the person who stops to help someone on the street." "I promise, sir, I swear I promise." After the young man left, Ryan approached his father. "Are you really going to give him a chance?" "I am." Matthew looked at his son. "Because someone gave me a chance, and because I believe kindness deserves to be rewarded, not punished. And if he doesn't work out, then at least we tried, but something tells me he will work out." Matthew smiled. "Do you know how I know?" "How?" "Because his eyes had the same sparkle mine did when Mrs. Helen gave me a chance. The sparkle of someone who won't waste the opportunity they've been given." Ryan hugged his father, proud of the man he was, and hopeful that he could become someone similar one day. That night, Matthew had a dream. He was back on that rainy Tuesday 20 years ago. He saw Mrs. Helen fallen on the sidewalk, the angry dog, himself running with the feather duster. But this time, when he looked around, he saw a chain of people stretching as far as his eyes could see. Joshua Parker, the employees he had helped over the years, Ryan, and so many others. When he woke up, he understood the meaning. Kindness wasn't an isolated act. It was a chain, a legacy that passed from person to person, from generation to generation, and everything he had built, all the lives he had touched, began with a simple choice: to stop and help someone in need. End of story. So, what did you think of this story? Did it touch you in some way? Tell us what you thought and where you're watching from. If you have a similar story to share or an opinion about the characters' choices, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Matthew made the right decisions? We'd love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.